The Group C sports prototype class of the 1980s contained some of the most iconic endurance racers to ever grace a track. Names like Jaguar XJR9, Porsche 962, and Mazda 787B have lodged themselves permanently in the minds of many racing fans. Tales of speeds exceeding 230 miles an hour at Le Mans, absolute Porsche domination, as well as the massive rotary upset from Mazda are still told to this day. As video games have improved in fidelity over the years, a much wider audience has been exposed to the wonders of old racing cars. Thanks to the rapid advances in video game technology 15 years after it raced, it was possible to simulate the Minolta-sponsored Toyota 88C-V in sufficient fidelity. Its appearance in Gran Turismo 4 endeared it to millions of gamers thanks to its high performance and elegant design. In the real world, the 88C-V represented the start of a new era for Toyota's sports car program, though its short career may imply otherwise. In the virtual world, however, the Minolta, as Gran Turismo fans affectionately refer to it as its career, lasts as long as players continue to boot up the game which it appears in. By the way, I will refer to the car as the Minolta in some places, so cry about it. Toyota's time in Group C before 1988 had been characterized by 4-cylinder engines and decent performances. Toyota themselves weren't heavily involved in the programs, leaving Dome and Toms to build and run the cars with Toyota's engines and badging. Toyota greatly increased its involvement after 1987, and with this greater involvement came Toyota officially putting its name on the cars instead of Dome or Toms having the naming privileges. Toms would still run the cars, but Dome's involvement was more subtle. Toyota aimed to increase its expertise in working with carbon fiber and designing race cars, so Dome continued its involvement to get them up to speed. Notably, the 88C-V is the last Toyota-powered prototype listed on Dome's museum page, implying that they took a backseat after the 88C-V. The 88C-V's direct predecessor, the Toyota 88C, saw moderate success in racing globally, scoring several poles, podiums, and a 12th place finish at Le Mans. Toyota's working racehorse, the 503E, provided motive force. This turbocharged iron block 4-cylinder was distantly related to the 3S GTE engine found in Toyota's road cars, and has placed Toyota's on the winner's circle in GT racing and in rallying. Toyota was keen on promoting its twin-can technology, so if there was an engine in bay need of power, a turbocharged 4-cylinder went in. In Group C racing, however, the 503E was hamstrung by its poor fuel economy, a very important drawback in the fuel mileage limited category, and mediocre low to mid-range torque when off turbo boost. Technically, power was never an issue, but the engine needed high levels of boost to reach competitive power levels. Boost levels to make the engine guzzle fuel like a camel drinks water. If Toyota wanted to start beating its competition, they need to ditch the forward cylinder. The 88C also possessed an aluminum monocoque when its rivals, like Jaguar, were starting to switch to far stiffer yet lighter carbon fiber for their chassis. In addition, the 88C's basic monocoque design dated back to the early 1980s. To be fair, the bottom of the monocoque was reinforced with carbon fiber, but why not just go all the way? The 88C was the final evolution of a 5-year-old concept, one that had become fast enough to compete with European rivals, but the two aforementioned sore points were assumed to be too much to deal with. Toyota needed a new machine to keep ahead of whatever arch-rival Nissan had planned for the following years, let alone Porsche, Jaguar, and Mercedes. What would the Japanese manufacturer come up with for their first official shot at Group C? Toyota's new car was dubbed the Toyota 88C-V. Despite the similar name to its predecessor, The 88C-V featured an all-new carbon fiber monocoque developed with dome constructed by Toray. The implied reason for the new name was a brand new 3.2-liter aluminum block V8 engine called the R32V. The R32V was Toyota's first pure racing V8 since the 5-liter turbo V8 found in 1970's Toyota 7. Nissan had rolled out a turbocharged V8 of its own in 1987, which likely encouraged development of the new engine. Why 3.2 liters? An official reason was never given, but Toyota's venerable 4AGE Straight 4 had suspiciously similar bore and stroke dimensions. If you want to think about it in that way, the R32V was two AE86 engines strapped together and force-fed air through twin Toyota-designed CT26R turbochargers. The new R32V was of an over-square construction with 82mm bore and 75mm stroke, allowing high rev potential and better packaging. It was also bigger than Nissan's 3.0-liter 1987 engine. Like most contemporary racing engines, the R32V possessed 4 valves per cylinder and dual overhead cams. This has been the standard to the present day, as it maximizes potential airflow to the engine. The pair of turbochargers helped the R32V produce around 800 horsepower at around 8,000 RPM, which was more or less as much as rivals had. Any torque issues that previous 4-cylinders may have had were a thing of the past, as peak torque of at least 570 pound-feet was available as low as 5,000 RPM. The 88C-V used boost pressures between 1.1 to 1.7 bar, or 16 to 24.6 psi. Besides that, little is known about the CT26R besides the ceramic material used to construct it, and that they were only for motorsport use. Thanks to that mysterious pair of CT26Rs connected to the exhaust, much more power than the stated 800 can be used in qualifying, where longevity and fuel economy is of no issue. Because of the twin turbochargers, the R32V ran at a relatively low compression at 801, which is lower than the 851 used in Nissan's competing VRH30 V8. All this new technology engine-wise comes at a cost, because the initial R32V was a heavy engine, weighing at 218 kilograms or 480 pounds. The outgoing 503E weighed 167 kilograms, a 51 kilogram difference. Besides the engine and chassis, the 88C-V was very much an evolutionary rather than revolutionary car. Whatever center of gravity benefits the carbon monocoque offered were offset by the heavy engine mounted high in the chassis. Carbon tubs were still bathtub shaped in those days, as autoclaves capable of making more complex shapes were either non-existent or too expensive to use. Most likely the former, as this is peak bubble era Japan we're talking about here. The monocoque therefore didn't look too different from the one used in its predecessor, borrowing the new material. This monocoque also had issues with delamination, which is unsurprising since this is Toyota's first time working with the material. Despite the delamination issues, the car was assembled to a high standard of fit and finish, something race cars of the past have struggled with. Like most competitive Group C cars, a double wishbone push-rod suspension setup was attached to the front sides of the monocoque and the transmission. This allowed the greatest amount of adjustability and cornering grip, though the lengths of the rear suspension arms were compromised in location because of the sizable diffuser tunnels. The car's power was transmitted to the ground with a 5-speed manual provided by March, the 88T. I did make a typo. The Minolta had 5 speeds in real life. No word on the differential type, but a March 88T parts listing mentions a spool for the differential, implying that the 88C-V had a spool differential. Spool differentials are small, light, and can take high amounts of power, but they have a negative effect on the car's handling as both rear wheels spin at the same rate constantly, causing understeer, The 88C-V had a lot of power to work with, so a lock differential could have been seen as more reliable. The same parts listing also mentioned parts that could be used for a limited slip differential, so what the rear wheels did while cornering is unknown at the moment. Carbon brakes were a couple years away from common use in endurance racing, so the 88C-V used huge vented steel discs to scrub off the high speeds the car was capable of. Mounted in front of the brakes were fat Bridgestone tires enveloping deep aluminum 5-spoke wheels from Race Engineering. Like most Group C cars, the 88C-V manhandled the air around it with a plethora of cooling vents and large diffuser tunnels. Self-taught dome engineer Aki Oku drew up a sleek, simplistic design outside of the aforementioned vents. It's almost as if they raced a concept sketch of a hypothetical Toyota design Group C. The most noticeable difference between the 88C-V and most of its predecessors is the side-mounted radiators. Since space was freed up at the front with the radiator relocation, the nose was noticeably longer and sharper than its predecessor. Therefore, the front end no longer resembled some strange sculpt in space. What Toyota wanted to do with the newfound frontal area wasn't 100% set in stone. The 88C-V, upon its initial reveal, bore some noticeable differences to the car many Gran Turismo fans know and love. For one, the rear wheels were partially covered. Despite appearances, the rear wheel coverings increased rear downforce, most likely by cleaning up dirty air from the wheels that would interact with the rear wing. The brake ducts were initially mounted closer to the sides of the front lip before being moved to a more front-facing location, presumably to grab a more direct airstream. The front clip design seen in Gran Turismo and in the surviving car would be used at Fuji for the most part, but the front clip used in testing was seen in practice just to get a benchmark of how it performed compared to the race design. The center of the front clip has an elongated horizontal space in the front that fed air to rudimentary front diffuser or the rear tunnels. This front diffuser was a shallow raised dome design between the front wheels that presumably reduced pitch sensitivity and increased front downforce. This raised section on the underside reminds me of the gular disc found in some labionine cyprinid fishes. The gular, or throat disc, is an outgrowth of the lower lip the fish uses to help stick to rocks and fast currents. Both the raised section between the 88C-V's front wheels and the gular disc in the fishes provide negative pressure towards the front of their bodies. This front pressure is vital to the functioning of both the fish and the car. The fish gets to stay put in fast-flowing rivers, while the car can corner at greater speeds. A small elliptical hole was placed in the center of the front clip between the headlights to provide cockpit cooling. Group C racers didn't have air conditioning. It's heavy. A series of small vents are also present on the windows for the same reason. Even with natural ventilation, the 88C-V was a warm place to be. Now to cover the rest of the vents. Most of the car's cooling was handled by sizable vents on the top surface of the car, which is highly efficient for cooling purposes, but less so for aerodynamic drag. The largest front-facing vents cool the radiators near the cockpit and the intercoolers within the doors. The turbos and oil coolers were fed by the lowest vents on the sides of the car. Initially, only the turbo vent existed on the side of the car, and the set of 3 gills on each side ventilated the engine bay. This was replaced by a rectangular rear-facing vent that released hot air from the radiator. At the rear lived one of the most interesting aerodynamic features on the car: the flick up directing the hot air in the engine bay away from the rear periscopic brake ducts. This feature was not present on the presentation car, which implies that there may have been brake cooling issues in testing. A medium-sized NACA duct was present on the engine cover to ventilate the very warm engine bay. The rear wing was a standard dual element type with neat looking triangular end plates that go very well aesthetically with the pointed rear. Previous and subsequent Toyota prototypes had squared off rears. Said rear wing was mounted high enough in order to get the cleanest airflow possible. The distinctive rear end treatment was presumably for drag reduction by cleaning up the wake from the rear wheels and the air passing through the tunnels, which originate just past the fuel tank near the middle of the car. The engine and gearbox assembly was even tilted forward slightly to allow more space for these tunnels. Despite their insignificance in race car design, the taillights had a very distinctive style that would fit on a supercar. Most other Group Cs, including the 88C-V's predecessors, pulled tail lamp units off the shelf. Overall, the design of the 88C-V was as simple and clean as a certain Kingdom Hearts song, which makes sense when you're experimenting with a new engine and chassis construction method. Dome was also one of the few companies in Japan with a 1-to-1 scale wind tunnel, so they made the most of it. If anything, the 88C-V is a pretty car. The 88C-V began testing in April 1988 and immediately ran into issues. For one, the car was overweight by over 100 kilograms. Now we get to one of the other statistical elements in the room. In Gran Turismo, the 88C-V weighs in at a svelte 850 kilograms, which is the Group C minimum weight. These were also the numbers used in some official media involving the 88C-V, so Polyphony Digital may or may not have been too far off the mark. Chassis 1 weighed 935 kilograms according to Dome's website, which is a pretty significant difference. To be fair, Group C cars didn't always hit the minimum weight limit, especially cars with bigger engines with more cooling demands. If the reports of the test 88C-V's weight were true, this means that Toyota carried out most of the car's development with a car weighing as much as today's Le Mans hypercars, aka the heaviest category of sports prototypes in history. In addition, the car's wheelbase was inexplicably short compared to other Group C machines, at 2,650mm compared to the 2,750 plus of competitors like Nissan and Jaguar. A short wheelbase helps with agility, but straight line stability suffers. For a car intended to race at Le Mans and Fuji, this is a strange design choice. The heavy weight, narrow track, and short wheelbase led to an unbalanced car that crashed more than once in testing. Furthermore, the suspension failed at least twice during testing, as it struggled to keep up with the prodigious loads the 88C-V exerted upon it. The suspension would be redesigned before the car made its competitive debut. Despite the troubles in testing, 88C-V chassis number 2 was ready to race by summer of that year. The 88C-V's maiden race would be at the Fuji 500 miles at Fuji Speedway. Fuji, before the 2005 redesign, was one of the fastest road courses in the world, with a long straightaway, weeping curves, and a pair of tight hairpins. The cursed 88C-V chassis used in testing would not be used again, as Toyota Team Toms called upon one of the older 88Cs as backup for the new car. As the 88C-V was a new car, Toyota wasn't expecting much and wanted to see where they'd finish. Jeff Lees, Masanori Sekiya, and Keiichi Suzuki would pilot our protagonist down the long streets of Fuji. Toyota wasn't the only team developing something new. Nissan debuted an improved version of their VRH30 engine, with 0.4 more liters of displacement than the old 3.0 liter version, priced in the VRH30A. Furthermore, they were using the new engine in a well-proven chassis instead of the experimental machine of Toyota. The 88C-V qualified a respectable 7th place with a 1:20.480, which was only a second off pole position. That 7th place becomes less impressive once you realize the 88C outqualified the 88C-V by 2 positions. Embarrassingly for Toyota, the Nissan took pole position. During the race itself, the 88CV's performance belied smoothly competent qualification as the machine rocketed itself to leave the race. Tom's, Dome, and Toyota had done something right with this new concept. Despite an early spin, the car ran strongly until the middle of the race when it suffered a wastegate failure and lost time in the pits repairing it. This effort was for naught, as that March 88T would fail later, taking the car out of the race. Toyota couldn't even save face with the 88C, as it crashed out and also retired. Nissan, meanwhile, would take a respectable third place, while the highest placed Toyota powered car would be the Sard MC88, coming many laps down in 6th. This Sard is obscure enough to be video bait in the future. Apparently next year's Challenger was already on the drawing board, so the 88CV's days were already numbered. Toyota themselves saw it as a transitional machine meant to gather data for the future. Suzuka is an undulating fast track with a unique figure 8 layout. Because of the sheer number of technical high-speed sections, a much higher downforce setup was needed than at Fuji. Therefore, Toyota slightly modified the car to suit Suzuka. The front wheels had drag-reducing covers installed, while the vent at the front was changed to a Nakaduck. A second headlight was installed in both lenses for evening racing. Horizontal slats were cut in a section at the back around the air jack. Qualifying performance had improved, with the 88CV landing on the third place of the grid behind two Porsche 962s and ahead of the 88C and most importantly, all Nissans. The race itself featured the 88CV harassing the two Porsches for the first section. During the broadcast, Jeff Lees is interviewed by a pit reporter, where he admits that the car has poor handling but good power and fuel economy. More points adding to the overweight theory. Unfortunately, fuel pump trouble sent the car to the back of the grid in 16th, the last finishing car. The 88C finished 5th salvaging the Japanese brand, but the shadow of Nissan's third place finish loomed large. Overall, the 88CV project was suffering from new car issues that would take significant development time to fix. The 88CV's last race would again be at Fuji for the Japanese round of the World Sports Car Championship. The previous two races were against domestic competition, so Toyota wondered how the new car would fare against international competition. Toyota Team Toms rolled out the new 88CV chassis number 3, which would wear the now famous Minolta livery. Chassis number 3 had an undisclosed amount of weight reduction applied that wasn't shared with its sister car. Despite this, it only weighed 4 kilograms less after race spec preparations, 951 versus 955 kilograms. Chassis number 2 will be stripped of the Minolta livery and repainted in the yellow, black, and white Packet Q colors. Nobody remembers this livery. It wasn't a Gran Turismo. Because Toyota Team Toms ran two different liveries with different title sponsors, the 88CV is usually referred to with the sponsor name first, instead of only by make and model. This is also done for other Japanese race cars that run multiple liveries. The naming quirk carried over to Gran Turismo despite the other 88CV not being present. Back to the race, there was yet another solid performance in qualifying for the Minolta, coming in 5th overall against some of the best sports cars the world had to offer. The other one the worst. Like the last Fuji race, the Minolta ran strongly from the beginning, but was delayed by the March 88T cracking under 578 pound-feet of torque. Making matters worse, weather conditions were monsoon tier, and the car had contact with something. I don't know, the Minolta barely appeared in the broadcast. The 88CV's aforementioned handling problems were no help in the wet. The other car had a forgettable performance mired in the back of the pack. Both cars finished at least. With Fuji done and dusted, Toyota called time on the 88CV's career. No Le Mans, Those 3 races were all she wrote for the 88C-V in its current form. The sports car racing series was over, and Toyota needed to focus on the upcoming year's machine. The 88C-V had served its purpose. Or so they thought. Most people watching this should know what Gran Turismo is, so there's no point to explaining it here. The 3rd game of the series was one of the most graphically impressive games of the early 2000s. Within the lowish car selection of 170 lay a mysterious, at the time, orange and green Mazda race car, the 787B. The internet was that funny thing you heard about on TV in 2001, and the US version of Gran Turismo 3 wasn't forthcoming with the information. The car curiously lacked an info box and the year of manufacture. As a young kid, I knew little of FIA rule changes or a Group C. I just saw a mysterious screaming car that looked like it came from a different race series from the R390 or TS020. Polyphony Digital was apparently bothered by the 787B's lack of era-appropriate rivals, and sought to change that in a big way. Gran Turismo 4 would be a colossal expansion in scope, quadrupling the car and track count from its predecessor. The 787B would no longer be alone, as an additional 6 new Group C prototypes were available to choose from. Many of the big hitters were present, and had reason to back up their inclusion. We'll ignore Porsche because their license was tied up with EA and was expensive. Mercedes, Peugeot, and Jaguar's Le Mans winners were present. From the Japanese contingent, Nissan brought along 2 different cars with heavy significance in sporting history, the R89C and R892CP. Toyota, the largest Japanese automaker and unavoidable presence in Gran Turismo, allowed Polyphony Digital to use the Minolta Toyota 88C-V. Among that crowd of race cars, the Minolta Toyota 88C-V is a questionable inclusion. It never won a race, and Toyota had at least 2 other Group C cars they could have chosen, the TS010 and any of the other CV cars that still existed. According to a Reddit post from DViLL, the 88C-V only appeared in Gran Turismo 4 because it was on display in Japan from 2003 to 2005, around the time Gran Turismo 4 was in development. Quite simply, it was available for Polyphony Digital to model. Did Polyphony Digital think that there were enough Group Cs and saw little reason to model one of the less convenient Toyotas? None of this matters when the Minolta is about to reach superstardom that Toyota itself could never envision for it when it was retired after its expensive 3-race career. Gran Turismo 4 players first see the Minolta Toyota 88C-V in the game's intro. After they stared mouth agape at the insane graphics, coupled with the operatic rendition of the Gran Turismo main theme, Moon Over the Castle, they watch cinematic cuts of automotive action shots, one of which is the Minolta in hot pursuit of a pair of other top-class race cars while cresting a hill on El Capitan. After the intro is over, they dove into the vast array of experiences that the game offers. For those that chose the window shop with Isamu Ohira's masterworks in the background, they saw the Minolta again in Toyota's classic car section, with no price listed. Their eyes dart to the bottom of the screen, where the car's specs are displayed. 788 horsepower? That made a TS020 right next to it seem anemic. Why was it listed as a 1989 car when the name clearly says 88? The informational text accompanying many cars in the previous games was absent in Gran Turismo 4, leaving that question unanswered in-game. The player likely went about their merry way, with the Minolta and potentially its rivals in the back of their mind as they played through the game's expansive career mode. They eventually reached the Gran Turismo World Championship. This is a 10-race series featuring the fastest cars in the game, and the machinery the player has access to may not cut it for this challenge. The somewhat unwitting player comes across the blue and white monster from the opening video and a dealership and can only watch as it streaks off to the distance with the other Group C and LMP cars. Assuming that the player had yet to do a single endurance race, they're long. The race car choices the player had access to were either flawed and or required a lot of grinding to access. You could purchase an LMP outright for the low price of 4.5 million credits. That's a lot of RSCs and COKLMs put on the virtual classified listing. Speaking of the COKLM, it's the best and easiest to obtain non-Minolta choice, but it takes skill driving to keep up with the top cars. You can stop a turbo on the multiple Pickwork Z or Camaro LM, you get its prizes, but you give up downforce in comparison to the fastest cars, and those choices shoot tires when upgraded. Almost every other choice less than 3.5 million credits requires exceptional tuning skill and/or driving to keep up. However, it's 2005, and the internet is more widespread than it was 4 years ago. The player can just look up a strategy guide online and find the useful prize car. While the player perused the guide, a familiar name jumped out at them: Minolta Toyota 88C-V. We'll assume that the player beat over 25% of the game, so they got into the souped up road car and headed straight to the mountainous circuit they first saw in the game's intro. The game hints at its key to the late game experience 2 minutes after the player boots it up if they bother to watch the intro. After about an hour and a half, or less time if the B-Spec speedup function is used, the player brings home a shiny new Minolta Toyota 88C-V. If the player has 5 brain cells rubbed together, the 88C-V will easily clear the Gran Turismo World Championship, bulldozing through one of the game's best known difficulty spikes. The Minolta will also take care of the extreme haul and top tier endurance races, provided that the player looks after the tires. Gran Turismo is no stranger to game-breaking prize cars, with strong vehicles available to any player who attempts some of the more out-of-the-way events earlier. The strength of the Minolta was probably discovered within late playtesting, and several low barriers were put up to prevent the player from blowing the game open within 3 hours. License tests can be completed from the start of the game, giving the skilled or determined player the ability to sequence break with ease. In the earlier games, you can enter most races with the prerequisite license. No completion requirement existed. The El Capitan 200 miles is a low barrier of entry. The A license, 25%, and decent road tar. Most players can keep their car pointed in the right direction and get the A license in about an hour. You see where this is going. Polyphony Digital intended that the Group C machines were hard to obtain, so most were locked behind late game races, often containing other Group C cars. In the previous Gran Turismo games, the top level race cars were easier to beat with the common prize cars obtained through the campaign. The most powerful opponents never breached 700 horsepower, and the computer drivers are quite exploitable. The addition of Group C cars power crept the late game and almost required that the player have one of their own to compete. The LMPs and GT1s had about 150 extra horsepower compared to real life, and the previous games that had more variety to the viable in-game choices. The aforementioned factors meant that Polyphony Digital had to make a Group C or LMP car easy to obtain, and the V8CV was their choice of gateway drug. If you factor together its blistering speed and ease of obtainment, the Minolta Toyota 88C-V is arguably the best car in Gran Turismo 4. Its erroneous stats play a huge part in its pace, as it's one of the lighter Group C cars, only undercut by the Mazda 787B and Peugeot 905, as well as possessing a 6th gear, a trait that only the Peugeot 905 shares. According to exhaustive testing carried out by a GT Planet member, the Minolta is the second fastest car in the game behind the Formula GT. In addition, the other Group C cars were either much slower or more difficult to acquire than the Minolta. Nissan's R92CP is nearly as quick due to its greater power, but it's one from the Fuji 1000 kilometers, a race you need a top-level race car for. Alternatively, you can wait 700 days for a used black one. Not convenient. His older brother, ER89C, is the prize for completing Mission 34, one of the hardest events in Gran Turismo history, so it's only available to elite players. If you have the Japanese version, the Sauber Mercedes C9 can be won from the Grand Valley 300 kilometers, but that's a 2-hour commitment. If you're not Japanese, it's one from Formula GT, the longest championship series in the game, which is still beatable with the Minolta. The former 3 cars are also massive fuel drinkers and tire eaters. To be fair, so it's the Minolta. You're not sacrificing hours of your life to get it. You can win with the Jaguar XGR9 after beating half the game, or you can burn a 3.5 million credit hole in your wallet for it, but you probably have the Minolta by then. Also, the XGR9 is probably the worst handling Group C. We return to the 787V, which can be purchased for the same price as the XGR9, or quite a bit less if you wait 694 days. It's down on power compared to the other Group Cs, but it's easy to drive, fuel efficient, and kinder to its tires. It also sounds amazing. Lastly, we come to the Peugeot 905, which is purchase only and seems like the best choice on paper thanks to its extremely low weight, but its gearbox takes 10 years to shift up, making it ironically the worst Group C. As you see here, every other Group C car is a massive pain to get in comparison. LMPs, like the Audi R8, are comparable in pace and less resource hungry, but all are more expensive than Group Cs or require the player to win a 24-hour long race. Lastly, the Minolta enjoys several advantages over the Formula GT besides ease of access. Since the car can be serviced at the Toyota dealership, it can accept power upgrades, run tires other than racing mediums, and can have its rigidity restored after hours of hard racing. A Stage 4 turbo nets you around 1200 horsepower, which is simply overkill and can even be supplemented by nitrous, which the Formula GT can't use. Toyota's Group C machine is also capable of a much higher top speed than the Formula GT. So are all the other Group Cs and LMPs, but that's beside the point. As the former hits an aerodynamic brick wall around 230 miles an hour, while the latter just keeps pulling. These factors give the Minolta a niche in the lap record department on fast tracks or endurance races. On the Cyberscore website, the Minolta holds the lap record on the Nürburgring Nordschleife and Circuit de la Sarthe, the 2 longest and most prestigious tracks in the game. Its high potential top speed also helped become the first documented car to reach 300 miles an hour in Gran Turismo 4. Overall, the Minolta Toyota 88C-V deserves its demigod status in the 4th installment of the Gran Turismo series. Perhaps its nickname makes it more memorable. Most purpose-built race cars possess purely alphanumeric names. Even if the Minolta is technically no different, its sponsor-first naming protocol gives gamers an easier to refer to it by. Even the Japanese commentators and period called it the Minolta Toyota. The Minolta Toyota 88C-V would also appear in the 2 Gran Turismo entries on the PlayStation 3, Gran Turismo 5 and Gran Turismo 6. As a non-PS3 owner, the only information I can give about the car in those appearances is what's available on Google. It also appears in the PSP version, which I also haven't played much of, but I bet it's useful there. In Gran Turismo 5, the Minolta reprises its role as a prize car. It's one from Like the Wind and A-Spec, guaranteeing it a spot in most players' garages. Like the Wind was much shorter than the El Capitan race, but required a significantly faster car, which the player should have at that point in the game. Players can also purchase the Minolta used if it shows up in the used car dealership. Polyphony Digital was busy scanning 100 other cars because Minolta returned as one of the less detailed standard cars. It doesn't help that the car was taken off display close to 2010, making it impossible for Polyphony Digital to scan it. Standard cars use models from past Gran Turismo games, and are there to pad the car count and stave off the pitchforks they get from fans if most of the cars were cut between console generations. Car information makes its triumphant return, so players can at last hear about the Minolta's real-life racing feats. The info box submitted the car's pace, lackluster handling, and transitional status. Adding more context to this will result in one can find on racing sports cars. The 88C-V still appeared to be a strong choice, but its thunder was stolen by the Red Bull X 2010 for best car in the game. This monstrosity, designed by the Adrian Newey, was designed as the ultimate expression of a race car design with no rules. In its exhaust streams lay the rest of Gran Turismo 5's 1,000+ long car list. The Minolta was reduced to a stepping stone to bigger and better pastures. It's still a great choice for people who want to play the game with normal cars instead. In Gran Turismo 6, the Minolta was purchasable for 1.9 million credits, but the career mode was short and easy. The 88C-V was yet another old standard car amongst the hundreds. Lost in a shovel of over 1,300 cars, Gran Turismo 6 marked the 88C-V's last appearance in the video game. As of August 2023, the Minolta hasn't returned in DLC in Gran Turismo 7 after skipping Gran Turismo Sport. A few other Group C cars like the R92CP did return, which implies Polyphony Digital doesn't think the car is important enough to bring back yet. Despite this, fans often request the cars return on Gran Turismo social media, and have even resorted to painting the Minolta's livery on other cars to fill the 88C-V shaped hole in their hearts. Because of its relative obscurity and location, the Minolta is unlikely to appear in another racing game as official content. Gran Turismo is the Japanese game market cornered these days, and few people outside the country know where the Minolta is located. The best thing fans of the car can do is beg Polyphony Digital to bring it back, recreate the livery on other cars, or continue playing Gran Turismo 4 through 6. Fortunately, there's a fourth option for 88C-V fans. Due to its popularity in Gran Turismo, mods for the 88C-V have been made from NASCAR Racing 2003 and Assetto Corsa. Having never played NASCAR Racing 2003, I can't comment on what the mod's like to drive, but the red line pack which the 88C-V is part of was well received. As for the Assetto Corsa mod by DDM, it uses a touched up Gran Turismo model. Unlike in Gran Turismo, the 88C-V mod in Assetto Corsa uses its real specs, so it possesses only 5 gears and weighs 935 kilograms listed on Dome's website. The differential is limited slip, as differential info on race cars like this is hard to come by. DDM took minor shortcuts in the mod's creation, like snagging the sound from the Porsche 962 and the rear suspension from the Sauber C9, but again, data of that type is difficult to come across. No clear recording of the car exists, though the car is audible on the TV broadcast that's seen it. As for the driving experience, it's twitchy and prone to power oversteer on corner exit. Setup can tame it, but the 88C-V is not a car for beginner level drivers, which is in line with what Jeff Lee said. To be blunt, the 88C-V mod is poor handling. It's a car with 720 to 920 horsepower and 90s tires. What were you expecting? Overall, the 88C-V mod for Assetto Corsa is worth downloading, if only for the ability to drive the car on a PC. The car also exists as user-generated content from Minecraft of all things. Created by the aforementioned DViLL, the 85:1 scale 88C-V shaped structure took him over a year to build. It's quite impressive work, complete with interior, an engine, and even working lights. Please check it out using the link in the description. The car has also been modeled on 2 separate occasions by professional 3D artists James Barrie and Juan Pablo Paredes. Clearly, this car has an effect on people. Surprisingly, for a car that raced about as many times as it's officially appeared in video games, the Minolta Toyota 88C-V has secured itself a spot in the Group C pantheon, however small it may be. Its sister car has been forgotten, despite continuing its career under different names to some success. Perhaps being retired and put on display was the best thing for Toyota's flawed first step at a carbon monocoque race car. The 88C-V is a great case study in the retroactive appreciation of a bygone era. Before its appearance in Gran Turismo, people most likely cared about the 88C-V outside of Japanese people who watched it the 3 races attended. Gran Turismo 4's release in 2005 was likely the main reason anyone younger than 40 likes the Group C category. Group C cars like the 88C-V and R92CP featured in the late game as some of the fastest things on track. Since Gran Turismo built itself on its realism, the insane numbers seen in the games aren't too far off from what the cars had in real life. Although this is less true today, prototype race cars at the time of Gran Turismo 4's release seemed neuter compared to Group C beasts. You didn't see 800 horsepower race cars with ground effect in the early 2000s. Aesthetically, Group Cs resemble a mix of supercars and fire jets, yet having a familiar road car flair thanks to the wide noses and developing bodywork. These features give the cars an appealing sense of familiarity later prototypes lack. Compare this to most open-wheel race cars, which are completely alien looking in comparison. Furthermore, 7 were available in Gran Turismo 4, enough for somebody to choose a favorite, but not enough to paralyze the player with choice. The Minolta is by far the easiest of these cars to obtain, so more people have direct experience driving it. The 88C-V represents digital media's influence on Group C's pantheon. One could say the same thing about the 787B, but it had other notable factors besides being prominent in games, like its engine and winning Le Mans. The 787B's digital prominence inversely to the Minolta's. Its unique features make it a common racing game selection, rather than car significance stemming from Gran Turismo like the Minolta. Whenever the 88C-V is mentioned online, it's usually in reference to the game series or someone building a model kit. Japanese endurance races from 1988 are a rare discussion topic. In fact, the car serves as a shibboleth to find Gran Turismo fans online. If the Minolta is mentioned as one of the favorite race cars, or they even call it the Minolta, the person is likely to have played Gran Turismo 4 through 6. The Minolta's rise to prominence could be compared to an obscure 80s song that appears in another form of media years later. 80s Japanese pop music experienced a meteoric rise in popularity thanks to the YouTube algorithm exposing foreigners to the music for the first time. Many of these artists had considerable success in their homeland before, but one of these artists lifted by the rising tide of the algorithm was largely forgotten beforehand. Kaoru Akimoto created a total of 1 album, sang in an OP for some obscure anime, and served as half of the singers for the short-lived pop group Shambara, which featured 2 ex-Cassiopeia members. After that, Akimoto-san went back to living in obscurity as a music teacher. She only gained appreciation for her talents recently when the song Dress Down from her solo album went viral, roughly 30 years later. Doesn't this story echo that of a certain blue Toyota? Both parties were in the middle of a quiet retirement somewhere in Japan, until a form of media that was nearly unthinkable in the late 1980s catapulted them to prominence outside of their home country. Google Trends starts recording data around the time of Gran Turismo 4's release, so search volume information pre-Gran Turismo 4 will always be a mystery. Trends related to the 88C-V peaked around Gran Turismo 4 and 5's release. Akimoto-san's popularity picked up around 2016, when her music started becoming sampled for future funk covers. The drive for musical artists to find new samples and racing game devs that have interesting cars often leads to a larger audience being exposed to cars and music that otherwise would languish in obscurity. Now, what became of the 88C-V trio? I can't find what happened to chassis number 1. It either no longer exists, or was converted into one of its successors. Chassis number 2 was upgraded to the 89C-V, in an attempt to right some of the many wrongs committed by its predecessor. The 89C-Vs were competent yet fragile race cars. As for chassis number 3, it ran along the 89C-V during testing to provide a benchmark for the upgraded car. It was run pretty hard, as the paint and bodywork were noticeably chipped. During post-career testing, the livery was updated to the one seen in Gran Turismo, matching the 89C-Vs running at the time. The headlight brand changed from CB to Koito, and the coffee brand on the side changed from NCAA to Suntory West. This may explain why the car was listed as a 1989 model year car. Ironically, the 88C would have a longer career than its successor, racing at Le Mans in 1989 as backup for the two 89CVs. Later, the 88CV became a show car, chips and all, for Toyota sports car efforts in Japan, as Minolta was still a prominent sponsor until 1991. The Minolta was put on display in at least one model up to the early 2000s, Toyota failing to give the car a literal fresh coat of paint. Nissan debuted the R89C, a rapid carbon prototype plagued with teething issues in 1989, and Toyota would remain locked in battle with Nissan for the most part, keeping them honest by stealing a few wins here and there. Group C racing effectively ended in 1992, and Minolta Camera stopped sponsoring Toyota around that time. The R32V was later enlarged to 3.6 liters, renamed R36V. A revised version of the R36V powered the Toyota TSL20 GT1, one of the most advanced sports prototypes of the 1990s. Toyota kept working with carbon fiber. They required the knowledge to compete in Formula 1 and build one of the most underappreciated supercars of its day, the Lexus LFA. Tom still races Toyotas to this day, though they only focus on the Japanese domestic racing series these days. Dome would take on a variety of projects since their partnership with Toyota, but everything they've done since is a story for another day. They helped Toyota early in their return to Le Mans in the 2010s. Minolta merged with fellow Japanese camera company Konica in 2003, forming Konica Minolta. Ironically, they focus on office electronics instead of cameras these days. Incidentally, Konica Minolta currently sponsors the number 10 Wayne Taylor Racing and Andretti Acura ARX06 running in IMSA. Currently, the Minolta Toyota 88CV rests somewhere in TRD's basement after restoration taking place sometime between 2016 and 2020. Will it ever run in anger again? Nobody knows. The Minolta Toyota 88CV is a significant footnote in Toyota's racing history. It laid the groundwork for a strong decade-long sports car effort. Beyond its real-life racing endeavors, it tore up the virtual tracks like nothing else in Gran Turismo. Its virtual career would lend it a greater significance than its accomplishments in the three races competed in, making it special compared to most other unsuccessful older race cars. New viewers, you know what to do if you want to hear more about cool bottom-dwelling fishes and semi-obscure endurance racing cars. There will be plenty where that came from this year and beyond. This is the Dantas Man signing off. Adios.